Painting a mask is the first method of localizing luminosity adjustments that I'll cover. It's actually a variation of something we just learned, enhancing a mask by painting through a selection. In that technique, we started with a basic luminosity mask on an adjustment layer, and then we customized it by painting with black and white paint through additional luminosity selections. This enabled us to further conceal or reveal adjustments beyond the limitations of the original mask. What I'll show you now is actually that very same technique, but instead of beginning with a luminosity mask on an adjustment layer, we will begin with a completely black mask that will entirely conceal the adjustment. Then we will paint through a luminosity selection with a white brush to reveal the adjustment only in specific areas of the image, leaving the rest of the mask entirely black. This will allow the adjustment to be completely localized and yet still be guided and feathered by the luminosity selection. I've been demonstrating a lot of curves adjustments, but remember that luminosity masks work with any adjustment. So for this example, I'll make a saturation adjustment. In this image, I'd like to work with the color saturation where the patches of sun are hitting the grasses and the flowers. I'll start by making a hue and saturation adjustment layer and then boosting the saturation all the way. And we can see how extreme that adjustment is. Next, I'll type Control or Command I to invert the mask, turning it black and completely concealing the saturation adjustment. I have all the lights and darks channels already generated, so I'll select one that will reveal the area I want to adjust but also separates it from other areas. Lights, lights, bright lights. This is a time when it's good to select the next more restrictive mask. With repeated passes of a high opacity white brush, I'll be able to push increasingly more paint through the lighter areas of the selection, making them even whiter on the mask than the channel itself shows. This bright lights channel looks like it will do a good job of revealing the adjustment in the brightest sunlit areas and concealing the adjustment in the shadows. So I'll Control or Command click on the bright lights channel to load the selection, and now I'll go back to the color image. This brings up something important to point out. In the past, we have always loaded a luminosity selection first and then generated the layer mask second, which creates a mask that mirrors the selection for the entire image. In this case, by making the mask first on the hue and saturation adjustment layer and then making the selection second, the mask doesn't show any of the selection until we paint on it. This is the key to creating a localized mask. I'll make sure that the mask itself is selected and that the selection is active, and I'll choose my paintbrush and I'll set the foreground color to white, and now with a properly sized brush and a soft edge I can begin painting on the image through the selection onto the mask. And I can work with the opacity if I want to increase or decrease the opacity, and I can change the size of the brush, and I can make multiple passes to bring in that adjustment to the areas where I want it. I'm also going to bring in some of that color adjustment into this patch of sun here in the background. Now let's view the mask. Alt-click on the mask, and we can see that the mask that we're painting is completely localized just to the areas where I want the adjustment to take place. But because we're painting white through that luminosity selection, it's a very detailed mask that we're creating, and it's allowing our adjustment to take place just where I want it. So you can see that great saturation that I'm adding to those sunny highlights. Now if I decide that I've overdone it in any particular place, I can always switch my brush color to black and then paint back over areas that I feel like I've got too much of the adjustment. And I can also still work with the opacity of that layer as well. And I can also go back to the adjustment itself and work with the saturation until I get it just where I think it looks right. One of the benefits of creating a localized mask in this way is that you can actually use different luminosity selections to create different parts of the same mask. If I now want to apply some of that color adjustment to the shadowed areas, I would just need to type Control or Command D to deselect the current selection, and now find a selection that will work for the shadowed areas. Let's see, I think the Super Darks mask looks like it will allow me to make some adjustments into the shadows that I want to make. So now I can just Control or Command click on that Super Darks channel and go back to the color image, make sure that that mask is selected, and now I can begin painting again through this new selection. However, this selection puts a lot of marching ants right where I want to be making my adjustments. So I'm going to type Control H to hide the ants like I showed before. I just need to remember that I have that selection hidden and remember to deselect it so that it doesn't affect future adjustments. Okay, now I'll paint with a white brush into those shadowed areas. And this is through that new selection. So again, working with the opacity of the brush and the size of the brush so that your adjustment is being painted in and you're creating just the mask that you want. Let's take a look at the mask. So you can see here I have some of the highlight areas that I painted with the first selection that's adding saturation in the highlights, and here I have areas that I am painting through this new darks selection that's adding some saturation into the dark areas. Let's see how that adjustment looks before and after, and now let's also see how that adjustment looks without my mask. Yikes! So that mask is really doing an excellent job of controlling that adjustment and localizing it exactly where I want it to go.